Everybody ready for that morning snack? Huh? Ready for the morning snack? They're like, yes. Here. There we go. Hello everybody, welcome back to Hidden Harvest with Liz. I am Liz, and we are on the Hidden Harvest homestead right now. I'm currently in my garage and I have a job that I have to get done. So I am actually going to sit here and talk you out of doing the thing that I think a lot of people are actually sitting here considering, given the changes in price of eggs. I recently went to my local Walmart and found out our eggs are $9 a dozen. And we live in a pretty rural area in Georgia, middle Georgia. Eggs are usually like $1, $1.50, $2 at the most for a dozen. So it's a large increase in the cost of eggs. And I know the first thing everybody's thinking, it's actually what I thought about doing last year. What I ultimately wound up doing last year was going out and getting chickens. It was kind of an impulse buy around the end of our tax season, and we brought home some baby chicks 1 year ago. It has been a huge learning curve. Lots of things that I didn't know, lots of things that I had to study, but ultimately I also made this choice knowing I was going to do it long before the price ever changed. I was already telling myself ages ago, I'm going to get chickens, and I had been studying up on how to care for chickens for, I don't know, a good 6 months before I got the baby chicks. Not to say that even that prepared me. There was still a lot of stuff I didn't learn until I had to do hands-on stuff with the chicks. For those of you who know, you know some of the things that you really don't anticipate chickens having a problem with, like their ability to go to the bathroom. Why am I going to try and talk you, dear listener, out of getting chickens? Why would I try to do this? Well, let me go over some of the bad things about keeping chickens, some things that you probably aren't considering before going and getting those cute little adorable things from your local Tractor Supply. And then we're going to go over some things about chickens that are awesome, amazing, ways in which they can definitely help your farm, and none of which really are the eggs, because as we'll talk about later, you may or may not be getting those. So, while I'm doing this, we will also be working on our brooder, which is right here. It is an old rabbit hutch that we converted into a chicken brooder. Ever since I raised my chicks, this has kind of become a catch-all for all sorts of random stuff that got put over here. So let's start with the obvious reason people will want to get chickens. We want eggs, lots of eggs. The inability to have to worry about where your next egg is coming from, that nice, cheap, delicious egg that you plan on getting from your chickens. Given the environment we currently have, what on earth was I don't even know what I was doing with this. What was I doing with this? What is this? Do I sniff it? I'm sure at some point I'll figure it out, but right now is not that time. All right, let's cover our first item on chickens. Bad things about chickens, reasons you shouldn't get chickens. Number one, every town, HOA, location, county, everything else like that, they have different regulations on getting chickens. You might be only allowed to have a limited number of hens. You may not allow to be having a rooster. There could be all sorts of things, and that requires research. Do you really feel like doing research to find out whether or not your government's saying, you shouldn't be allowed to have chickens? There's number one. Oh my goodness, at the spider webs. Also, along with those regulations, there's always the chance that the chicken that you thought you got, you may not have actually gotten. Say, for instance, you go to Tractor Supply and you get a bundle of 10 chickens. They haven't sexed those chickens, by which they have not checked to see whether or not those are hens or roosters. You get home, and before you know it, the one that you thought was a cute hen is actually a rooster. It starts developing the little waddle, it bucks up at you. It's kind of adorable, but at the same time, you're not allowed to have one. What do you do with a rooster that you can't keep? Okay? Say you're starting out with a whole bunch of freshly laid hens. You got your number right. You don't have any surprises because you paid the little bit extra to have your hens sexed, so you're pretty good there. Then you have to feed them a special kind of feed because they are brand new. You have to know how to care for them, warm them. You have to feed them properly, give them bedding, and you have to have a location for them where they're going to be safe and warm. Obviously, if you're, say, inside of a house and you've got animals inside your house, dogs, cats, someone who might be allergic, the whole 9 yards, you're going to have to accommodate for that. And they poop. Chickens poop. Everything poops. All of the things poop. Bill Gates things poop. Eventually the bedding is going to have to be changed, which means you are going to have to change out their bedding. And it will start stinking, especially if you don't change it often enough. So, can you handle the smell? At least for a little while until they get big enough to go outside. Outside? There's a thought. Where do you put them when they go outside? How are you going to build your own chicken coop? You know, order a chicken coop. Some of those chicken coops are pretty expensive nowadays. And the more people decide to get their own chickens, the more expensive those are going to get. So after you establish this, you also have to predator-proof your area. How much chicken coop, how much chicken run, have you done your research to find out how much of each you need for the amount of chickens that you have. Now you're also going to have to feed them. Those chickens, the adult chickens, are also going to poop, which means you're going to have to change out their bedding as well. Have you researched different ways in which to change out bedding? Do you know the difference between regular bedding, deep litter methods, or some other method that might interest you? I would definitely recommend researching those if you haven't already. Think about these things ahead of time. Now, after your chickens have grown from this area, and it takes a good few weeks for the chickens to get big enough to go into an outside coop, and it definitely needs to be warm outside before they can go out there. From here, whenever they're first born, typically when you get them in a store, they're only a couple of days old. From here to when they have to go out, they'll be what they call pullets, which is basically a teenage chicken. And some people may spend the extra money to go ahead and get a pullet, which is a teenage chicken. You're still going to need a location that is safe enough for them to go. You are going to have to train them to the area where they will sleep. My chickens are trained to a light. I don't know why, but it's what works for them. They know to go where the light is, and that's where they go to bed at. So I just worked with it. It's just what they decided on. I didn't choose this. Also, chickens are an animal, which means if you get this animal, you are taking responsibility for this animal, not just so it can give you something. You're taking responsibility for its care, maintenance, its whether or not it's sick, whether or not you're doing like some sort of immune boosters. Well, you have to feed them, you have to water them, you have to make sure that they've got clean water all the time, because if you don't, they will drink poop water in a minute. I've seen them do it. I keep telling my ladies to have standards and they won't do it. They just keep pooping in their water bowl and drinking out of it. Can't trust them for 5 minutes. And chickens are not the smartest creatures. They will get themselves into things. They will do things that are dumb. The only thing that I have found that chickens are more or less smart at is knowing what they can and can't eat. That they managed to figure out on their own. I don't know how, but they do know this. As far as the needs, I actually kept notes because there's a lot of downsides to getting chickens, things that I didn't even consider back when I got them. Their needs: food, water, calcium, herbs for immune boosting. They also need little pieces of grit, which is kind of like tiny, tiny rocks, because that is how they digest their food. If they don't have any grit that actually sits inside their stomach and helps them break up that food, they're not digesting properly. So the calcium, you can get oyster shells, you can give them their old eggs back, there's calcium pellets that you can get for them, all sorts of things. You need to know what supply you have on hand in your local area that you can get for your chickens. As far as their chicks, they need bedding, warmth. They're very, very vulnerable at this stage. Actually, chickens in general are just vulnerable, period. Every single creature out there, basically, most omnivores even, will go after a chicken. Raccoons will go after a chicken. An armadillo will go after a chicken or chicken eggs. Snakes will go after a chicken. I've actually got a picture from last year when I came out here and there was a snake draped across the area where I kept my baby chicks. Thankfully, there was no way for them to get them. I actually lost my entire first batch of baby chicks because of a roaming dog. It was my fault. I left the area open where they were at, but I thought we were only going to be gone for a few minutes. We wound up being gone a whole lot longer, and a dog found its way in. Past the barricade that I put in the way, but the point is that was a horrible thing to come home to, and a horrible lesson to learn. That was a horrible lesson, and something I never wanted to have to go through again. So there's all of that. Like I said, they're vulnerable. Everything will try for a chicken nugget snack. Anything, all of the things. Your dog, your cat, things you didn't think would actually go after them, will go after them. You have to protect. Then, of course, we covered the regulations, how many chickens you can have, whether or not you're allowed to have any roosters, whether or not the chicken coop has to be a certain amount of feet away from your neighbor, that kind of thing. A lot of areas have a lot of regulations having to do with chickens, and there's some places that simply will not allow chickens. Now, if you live in an HOA or you live in an area without regulation, there is a way to petition in which you can petition to try and get the ability back to have chickens, but make sure that you actually investigate that, because there's nothing worse than getting a whole batch of chickens and then finding out you can't keep them because they got a little bit too loud and your neighbor heard them finally. Okay, we covered the coop, the maintenance, the smell. Maintenance, I'm going to have to do that very soon because I do the deep litter method. The deep litter method basically being I put down wood chips. They use that for a few weeks. I lay down some wood chips over the top of that. They use that for a few weeks. I lay down some wood chips over the top of that. They use that for a few weeks. And after a few months, I scrape it all out and I start the process all over again. But in the deep litter method, the bottom layers are starting to decompose already. And that is actually an inoculant that I use inside my garden, or will very soon. We'll get to talking about that when I actually go to clean out my chicken coop. It has been sitting since the beginning part of winter. I reset the entire chicken coop. And now it's time for a spring cleaning, so I'll bring you guys along for that. But there is still a smell. Poop smells. It's a thing that happens. There is such a thing as, you can tell it's unhealthy of a smell. It'll be a strong ammonia smell if you're not careful, if you don't take care of it, if you don't take care of your chickens, and that is overwhelming. The smell can be pretty bad. So be aware, and of course baby chicks. While you're taking care of the baby chicks, that smell will be pretty bad, and they poop everywhere, all over the place. On top of their food, in their own water, on their brother or sister. And then, there is another set of regulations that has to do with, even if you get chickens, you may not be able to keep them. And here's why. For those of you who like to get attached to animals, and a lot of us do, it's like human nature to get attached to an animal. In some cases, it's easier to get attached to an animal than it is another person. There is the regulation that chickens do not count as pets, as in, for the most part, most places would look down upon a cop or a regulatory agency like EPA or some random stuff. Regulatory systems coming onto your property and saying, we're going to take away your dog, or worse, we're going to kill your dog in front of you. Why? Because it might be sick. So we're just going to kill your dog in front of you. You can thank us later. The sad thing is they can do that with chickens because they're not considered a pet. They're not considered a belonging, as it were. In the same way, they can claim eminent domain over certain properties given adequate reasoning, and I say adequate reasoning because I don't think that that's actually a thing. It's just whatever they constitute as adequate reasoning. They can just go through and murder your entire chicken yard of chickens. There has been a slew of people losing entire flocks of chickens because regulatory people are coming in and saying, oh, your chicken looks sick, we're going to have to take out your entire flock. Not, let's isolate this chicken, let's do some tests, and watch the rest of the flock to find out whether or not anybody else in the flock is sick. This could be just a respiratory cold. It could be any number of things. It could be that the chicken decided to sip out of the water too early, got water up inside its beak the wrong way, and has sneezed. It could be any number of things. Chickens are animals, they get colds too. But if they walk up and say, that chicken looks sick, it might be the bird flu, we will kill all of your chickens. Sadly, that is actually a thing that they can do, and they do it frequently. As a matter of fact, I can think of a few times in history so far that they have actually done this to people, taking out their entire flock, and there's no recourse for it. It's not like, sorry, we had to come do this for the protection of all of humanity. We must take out all of your chickens because they look sick. Here is some reimbursement for you to get more chickens back, because obviously this is a resource, a thing that you live off of. It's not necessarily a type of income, but it is a resource that your property maintains. It would be like, I don't know, the EPA or some regulatory code enforcement, some person or another, coming onto your property and firebombing an apple tree and saying, you're welcome. Just doing our due diligence and walking away, saying maybe that there was a fungus on it, possibly, because that leaf didn't look the right color green. So that is a thing that has happened, can happen in a lot of areas, and does happen. So these are things you probably need to talk to local farmers about, whether or not this is a thing that happens frequently in your area. And I would definitely recommend doing that sooner rather than later, because I would hate for somebody to get an entire flock of chickens, get attached to them, give them names, their children get attached to them, have their favorite chicken that likes to sit in their lap and eat their seeds out of their palm because it's actually adorable when they do that, and then have some code enforcement person come by and say, I saw your chicken sneeze, I'm going to have to butcher all of your chickens. Because that should be illegal. For those of you who are going to the store looking at that baby chicken and saying, I'm going to get that chicken because my eggs are $9 and $10 for a dozen. Understand from the time that that chicken is born, and like I said earlier, the chicks that you have inside your store are usually a day or so old. They're not very old at all. They ship them as soon as possible. Typically within the first day to 2 days, because then they technically don't have to feed them yet, they just ship them. It cuts down on some of the waste that's in the shipping process, and it cuts down some of the cost on the part of the farm itself, and they just ship them off. And then whenever they get to the store that they're going to sit at, that's when they get their first food and water and stuff like that. So you're getting your chickens pretty early. It takes at least 18 weeks before those chickens will lay. And even then, it would be irregular. They are learning to lay. Their body has to adapt. They have to go through this entire process that goes on in order for them to start laying. Now, if you get your chickens during the time when I normally get chickens, like normally as in I just did last year and I will again this year, it is early March. If you push out that far, we got our first egg in September. I think it was in September. And then right as they started laying, winter hit. I was fully expecting us to not get any eggs because I've heard every single year that people don't get eggs during the winter time. Now don't misunderstand me. We did lose on the amount of eggs that we got. Between September and when winter fully hit, we got tons and tons of eggs and we had no idea what to do with them. We hadn't prepared for all of that. But after that, after we started getting to where we were realizing these are the dishes that we can make, this is the food that we're going to eat, and using those eggs, by the time we started getting adjusted to it, winter had set in, and the chickens slowed down. As a matter of fact, here it is February 25th, and I'm just now starting to see some days where we have a full batch of eggs. And by a full batch of eggs, I mean 5 or 4 eggs. Because we have one hen that I am pretty sure never started laying. I really think that that hen had something wrong with it, and it has never laid for us. So here it is several months later, and we're still not getting full batches of eggs every single day. So when you think about the long run, how much money am I spending on my chickens? If you have the ability to allow your chickens to roam a huge area, they might be able to get enough to sustain them during the summertime, the spring, the fall. During the wintertime, most places are too cold for there to be a whole lot of like bug life and things like that to sustain an entire flock. You're going to have to supplement. So I have got 7 chickens, and it takes a bag per month to feed those 7 chickens. The feed cost $28 for a month. How many eggs do you use in a month? How much eggs do you use in a week? That all depends on family. You might have like 2 people in your house and only one of you eats eggs. In which case, having chickens is probably not going to help you unless you just want a couple of pets and that occasionally give you eggs. Now, mind you, those chicken eggs are going to be healthier than the ones you get from the store, but is it worth the trouble of housing them, feeding them, cleaning up after them, the whole 9 yards? So, there is my entire spiel of why you should not get chickens. That's a lot of information to digest. Now, I need to finish fixing this brooder because I'm listening to get chickens after I just told you not to get chickens. Let me just go ahead and say, if you have the ability to raise chickens or raise animals on your property in any way, I would definitely recommend that, as if anything, it is a good learning experience. Humans don't have enough real hands-on learning experiences nowadays. There's a lot of sedentary jobs. There's a lot of emotional stress. There's a lot of tension in the world right now, especially political tension. And there's something about the tactile and emotional connection you have to the world, like the planet itself, the actual Mother Nature. The connection you have there whenever you raise an animal, it can't be replaced by any other job or vocation that you could possibly do. You might go out and, I don't know, do mergers and plan high-profile cases and bring your boss coffee or, just something like that. But when you go home, you see this animal that you cared for, and there's just like this emotional connection you have with the animal, even if the animal's not really emotionally connectable, as in my chickens, they do not emotionally connect to people, not really. But there is something about being able to put a handful of seeds inside your hand and having a whole bunch of chickens eat out of your hand, and you can feel their little necks tickling the top of your hand, and you're like, I feel connected. This is real. It's not something that exists online or through a computer screen or anything else like that. It's real. It's tactile. It's an influence I have had on my world. So there's no replacing that. There's also the thing of self-sufficiency, which, it's a big catch-all phrase for learning how to do things yourself. And I won't say that chickens will make you self-sufficient, because ultimately you're kind of reliant on somebody to give you the food for the chickens in order to feed them, unless you've got large bits of property and you can just let them free range. Not everybody has that. I don't have that. Not to mention I have a few dogs that don't really care for chicken at all. I mean, well, they care for chicken. They care a lot for chicken. They would love to make an entire chicken meal if they could. So I can't just let my chickens free range. It's not going to happen. And there's a lot of other folks that are in the same boat. You can't free range, which means you are going to be reliant on feed stores in order to feed your chickens. And there are times that certain feed go through, I don't want to say schedule changes, because that would be kind of a what if. What if they're making the food so that the chickens don't lay eggs or something like that. There's the occasional time that they might mess up a mixture and your chickens suddenly aren't laying and you're going to have to find a different brand. Things like that. There's a lot of considerations about raising chickens. Out of all of the things that I can think of, chickens teach you how to care for animals that are not just pets. In a lot of cases, we've domesticated a lot of animals, and they more or less care for themselves right next to us. Like, I don't really have to baby my dogs. I do kind of baby some of my older dogs because they've got messed up teeth and they're old, so I mush up their food and put a little turmeric inside their food to help with the aching joints or whatever. But for the most part, dogs and cats don't really need our help. They exist alongside of us. Whereas chickens, without care, would just like disappear or die in random ways. We used to have a roaming flock that was around that belonged to somebody. Nobody claimed, and they just one at a time slowly disappeared. So, yeah, they're very dependent on people to keep them alive after trying to talk you out of having chickens. First off, I hope that there's at least a few of us that said as soon as I said that, said, don't tell me what I can't do. I'll do it. Do it. Do your research first. Definitely do that. Alright, ladies and gentlemen, that is it for the day. I am done attempting to talk you out of getting chickens. Now, I would love to hear in the comments section, are you getting chickens? And I'm hoping the answer is yes if you have the ability to, because there's nothing like it. Nothing prepared me for it, even all the research that I did, all the preparations I made. There was nothing really to prepare me for it. But it was an experience, and it has been all year long. In my next video, I'll be talking about all of the preparations that I'm going to be doing here, all of the things I learned in my first year, and all of my plans going forward with my chickens. And, of course, a coop cleanup. The good news is in about 6 months, that coop cleanup is going to turn into very good plant food. I will see you guys then. You have a wonderful day and night, and you stay shiny. Bye.